Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way.
3 very creepy fog horror stories. Story 1. The Fog on Ridgeline Road. There's something about fog that never really sat right with me. Not the light kind, the kind that floats over a lake on a cool morning and burns off by 9. I'm talking about the thick, heavy kind, the kind that swallows everything whole and gives nothing back. The kind that makes you feel like the world just ended 20 feet in front of you. That's the kind of fog that rolled into Harlow County the night Kevin Draper decided to take the back road home. Kevin was 26. He'd grown up in that area, so he knew Ridgeline Road the way you know your own house in the dark, by memory, by feel. He'd driven it 100 times, probably more. It was the kind of road locals used to avoid the highway, winding up through the hills and back down the other side, cutting maybe 15 minutes off the commute. Nothing special about it, just a narrow 2-lane road with no streetlights and a lot of tall pines crowding both sides. It was late October. Kevin had been at his buddy's place watching a game, and he left around 11:30 at night. His buddy, a guy named Darnell, told him he could sleep on the couch, but Kevin had work in the morning and wanted to get home. He said goodnight, walked out to his truck, and that was the last time Darnell saw him act like himself. Kevin told me this story directly. I want to make that clear. He's alive. But he told me he wishes sometimes that he could go back and just take the highway. He said the fog was already thick when he turned on to Ridgeline Road. Not unusual for that time of year, not in those hills. Cold air coming down from the ridge mixing with the warmer air in the valley below. He'd driven in worse. He slowed down to about 25 miles per hour and just kept his eyes on the yellow center line. About 2 miles in, his headlights caught something on the side of the road. A car. It was pulled halfway off onto the gravel shoulder, hazard lights blinking orange through the fog. Kevin slowed down. He was a good person, the kind who actually stops. He pulled up alongside it and rolled down his window. The car was a dark blue sedan, older model, and it looked empty. No one in the driver's seat, no one in the back, just an empty car with its hazards on. He sat there a moment, idling, his own headlights cutting a cone of yellow light into the fog ahead. Then he thought maybe someone had gone off into the trees to use the bathroom. Happens all the time on back roads. He pulled forward just a little bit, and that's when his headlights swept across something standing at the tree line. A person. They were standing perfectly still, facing away from the road, just at the edge of where the light reached. Tall, real still. Kevin said the first thing that struck him before the fear was just how still they were. Not moving at all, no shifting weight, no turning to look at the headlights, nothing. Just standing there, staring into the trees. Kevin honked once. The figure didn't move. He called out through his window, "Hey, you okay out there?" Nothing. He sat there maybe 30 seconds, which he said felt like 10 minutes. He was trying to decide what to do. His instincts were pulling him in 2 directions at once. Part of him was saying, this person needs help. The other part was saying, something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. He decided to get out of the truck. He left his engine running, left his headlights on, and stepped out onto the gravel. The fog was so thick he could barely see 20 feet in any direction. The air smelled like pine and cold earth, and something else he couldn't name. Something faintly sweet, almost floral, that didn't belong up on a ridge in late October. "Hello?" he called out again. The figure turned. Kevin said he couldn't explain exactly what was wrong with the face. He said it looked like a face, the way a mask looks like a face. Everything was there, eyes, nose, mouth, but something about the proportions, something about the way the features sat together was just slightly off. Not dramatically, not in a movie monster kind of way, just wrong. Like looking at a photograph of a person that's been stretched just 2% too wide. He said the figure smiled, and then it took one step toward him. Kevin got back in the truck. He told me he doesn't know how. He doesn't remember the decision to move. He just found himself back behind the wheel, door slamming, hands on the steering wheel, and he drove. He didn't look back. He didn't slow down. He kept his eyes on that yellow center line, and he drove. Until Ridgeline Road dumped him back out onto the county highway, and the fog thinned out, and the streetlights came back, and the world felt like the world again. He called Darnell from the highway shoulder, shaking so hard he could barely hold the phone. Darnell wanted to call the police, but Kevin said no. He said he just knew that if he tried to explain what he'd seen, nobody was going to believe him. There was no way to describe it without sounding crazy. He never took Ridgeline Road again. But here's the part that really got me. About a week later, Kevin was talking to an older neighbor of his, a retired guy who'd lived in that area his whole life. Kevin told him vaguely that he'd had a strange experience up on Ridgeline Road without going into detail. And the old man nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, you want to stay off that road when the fog rolls in." Kevin asked him why. The old man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There was a woman who disappeared up there about 12 years ago. They never found her. People used to see her car up there sometimes, sitting on the shoulder with the hazards on, but whenever they stopped to check, it'd be empty. The police went up a few times. Nothing. Eventually, people just stopped stopping." Kevin didn't say anything. He just asked what the woman had looked like. The old man thought about it for a second and said, "Tall. Real tall." Kevin went home and didn't sleep for 3 days.
Story 2. What came to the cabin. I want you to understand that Renata is one of the most grounded people I have ever met in my life. She's a nurse, 12 years in the ER. She's seen things that would shatter most people, and she just processes them and keeps moving. She's not someone who scares easily. She's not someone who makes things up. So when she told me what happened at her family's cabin up in the northern part of the state, I believed every word. She'd been going up to that cabin since she was a little girl. It had been in her family for 30 years. A simple place, 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, a porch that looked out over a small lake. No Wi-Fi, barely any cell signal. That was the point. She used to go up there once a year, usually in early November, just to decompress. No friends, no family, just her and the woods and the quiet. The fog moved in on her second night. She'd been out on the porch earlier in the evening, watching the last of the daylight drain out of the sky, and the air had that particular stillness that comes right before the weather changes. By the time she went inside and got the wood stove going, a light mist was already drifting off the lake. She didn't think much of it. She made dinner, read for a while, and went to bed around 10. She woke up at 2 in the morning. She didn't know right away what had woken her. She just came up out of sleep the way you do when something's wrong, heart already beating a little faster than it should be, eyes open and staring at the ceiling. The cabin was dark. The wood stove had burned down to embers, and outside, through the window beside her bed, there was nothing, just a white wall of fog so thick it blocked out even the trees. She lay there listening. Footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate, like someone walking the length of it, stopping, then walking back. She told me she made herself stay still and think rationally. Could be an animal. Deer wandered up on porches all the time. Could be the boards shifting in the cold. Could be a lot of things. She ran through the list the way a sensible person does, and she talked herself most of the way down. Then, whoever it was, knocked on the front door. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, patient, not frantic, not urgent, just 3 knocks, like someone who was pretty confident you were home and was willing to wait. Renata said she sat up in bed. Her brain was throwing every normal explanation at the wall. Hiker in trouble, someone whose car broke down on the access road, lost Hunter. She thought all of it. But it was 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in early November, and this cabin was 8 miles down an unpaved road, and the nearest other structure was a closed-up fishing resort 3 miles further north. Nobody had any business being here. She got up, she pulled on her sweatshirt, and she went to the front room, and she stood in front of the door. 3 more knocks. "Who's there?" she called. A voice said, "I'm sorry to bother you. My car went off the road. I just need to use a phone." It was a woman's voice. Calm. Too calm, Renata said. She was an ER nurse. She'd heard people in genuine crisis. They had a quality to them, a tightness, an edge, even when they were trying to hold it together. This voice had none of that. It was flat. Pleasant almost, but flat. Renata asked, "Where did you go off the road?" "Just back down the access road," the voice said. "I wasn't far." "I don't have any cell signal up here," Renata said. A pause. Then the voice said, "Could you just open the door?" Not, "Can I come in?" Not, "Please help me." Just, "Could you open the door?" Renata said she stood there for a full minute and didn't move. And she told me the thing that scared her most in that minute wasn't fear exactly. It was the complete absence of any instinct to open the door. Every piece of her, every professional instinct, every empathetic impulse, every part of her that had spent 12 years running towards people in crisis was telling her to stay exactly where she was. She backed away from the door without saying anything else. She went back to her bedroom. She picked up her phone and she held it, knowing there was no signal, just to have something in her hand. And she sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and she listened. Footsteps again, back and forth across the porch, back and forth, for almost an hour. She said at one point, maybe 20 minutes in, she heard something else, a sound she couldn't immediately identify, low and slow, like a long exhale right up against the window glass. She looked at the window, and the fog was pressed against it so tight she couldn't see through it at all. But she thought, she wasn't sure, but she thought she could see a shape against the white, the suggestion of something, head and shoulders maybe, standing just outside. She turned away. She stared at the floor. She did not look back at the window. The footsteps stopped just before 4 in the morning. She didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally came and the fog started to lift, she made herself walk out onto the porch. The boards were wet with dew, and pressed into the dew, in a line from one end of the porch to the other and back, were footprints. She told me what got her, what really stayed with her, wasn't even the footprints. It was the size of them. They were small, child-sized almost, and the stride was all wrong, too long for a child, way too long, like something that was child-sized on the bottom, but very large everywhere else. She packed up and drove out that same morning. She hasn't been back to the cabin since. She told her brother about it a few weeks later. He looked at her funny and said, "That's weird. Dad told me the same kind of story about that cabin, said something knocked on the door in the fog one night when he was up there in the 80s. He never talked about it." She asked if her father had opened the door. Her brother said he didn't answer it, but when he went out the next morning, there were marks on the doorframe, like something had been pressing against the door from outside for a long time.
Story 3. The Man in the Intersection. I don't know how to explain what happened to my cousin Theo without it sounding like something he made up. I've known Theo his whole life. He's 32 now. He's the kind of person who overthinks everything, who second-guesses himself constantly, who is more likely to rationalize something strange than to accept it as strange. So the fact that he couldn't rationalize this, even after years of trying, means something to me. Theo used to do overnight truck deliveries, regional routes, nothing cross-country. He'd leave the distribution center around midnight and run a loop through 3 or 4 counties, dropping pallets at grocery stores and convenience chains, and he'd be back by 7 or 8 in the morning. It was boring, lonely work, but it paid well, and he liked the quiet. He said driving at night, once you got past the tiredness, had a kind of peace to it. He'd been doing the job about a year when it happened. It was a November night, deep into the month, the kind of cold that makes the fog feel almost solid. Theo was about 4 hours into his route, coming through a small town called Griswold. Population maybe 3,000, the kind of place where everything closes by 9 and the streets are empty by 10. He'd driven through Griswold 100 times. He knew the route by heart. At the center of town there was a 4-way intersection, the main street crossing the county road, traffic light. Usually he'd roll through on green and not even think about it, but that night, as he came up on the intersection, the light was red. He stopped. The fog was heavy enough that his headlights were just bouncing back at him, illuminating about 20 feet of asphalt and not much else. The town was completely silent. It was maybe 3:15 in the morning. There was no one around. He was sitting at the red light, idling, radio off, just waiting. And out of the fog on his left, from the direction of the county road, a man walked into the intersection, just walked out into the middle of the intersection and stopped. Theo said the man was wearing a long, dark coat, and he was walking like he had somewhere to be, purposeful, steady, but then he stopped right in the center of the crossing and just stood there, facing Theo's truck. Theo's headlights lit him up full. He said the man was just looking at him, hands at his sides, standing there in the middle of this fog-soaked intersection at 3 in the morning, staring at the truck. Theo said his first thought was drunk guy, someone who wandered out of a bar, except there were no bars open. His second thought was medical emergency. Maybe the guy was in some kind of crisis state. But the man didn't look unsteady. He didn't look confused. He looked like he was exactly where he meant to be. The light turned green. Theo didn't move. He sat there with his foot on the brake, watching the man through the windshield. The man didn't move either. Theo said, "Okay," out loud to himself. He figured he'd just wait. Eventually the guy would move. He sat through one full light cycle, green to yellow to red, red back to green, and the man never moved an inch. On the third green, Theo cracked his window. "Hey, you need help? You need me to call somebody?" The man said, "Come here." Just that. Not yelling, not desperate, just a flat, direct instruction. "Come here." Theo closed his window. He told me that sitting in that truck in that moment, he ran through everything. He was a big guy, Theo, 6'2", reasonably built. He was not someone who scared easily in a physical sense, but he said the idea of getting out of that truck felt like the worst idea he'd ever had in his life. He couldn't explain why. He just knew, the way you know not to touch something that's humming with electricity, some deep animal part of you, that getting out of that truck was not an option. He put the truck in reverse. He backed up slowly until he could take a side street, and he went around the block, coming back at the intersection from a different angle. When his headlights swept across the center of the crossing, it was empty. The man was gone. Theo sat there on the side street for a while, telling himself it was nothing, telling himself the guy had just wandered off. He finished his route in silence and didn't say anything about it to anyone for almost 2 months. Then one evening he was killing time online and he ended up on a local history page for Griswold County. Old stuff, photographs, genealogy records, that kind of thing. And he found a scanned newspaper article from 1962. A man had been struck and killed at that same intersection, hit and run. A truck driver, actually. The article said he'd been walking home from a late shift and was crossing at the county road when a vehicle came through. Theo said he sat with that for a long time. He told me the thing he kept coming back to wasn't even the possibility that he'd seen something that shouldn't exist. It was the words, "Come here." Because when he thought about it afterwards in the cold, sober light of the following weeks, he couldn't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was standing in that intersection had been waiting for a truck driver specifically. He quit the overnight route the following month. I asked him once point blank, "Do you think it was a ghost?" He was quiet for a really long time. Then he said, I think it was something that's been standing in that intersection for 60 years, waiting for the right truck to come along. And I think the only reason I'm here talking to you right now is because I didn't get out of the cab." He paused, then added, "I think about the driver that hit that man in 1962. I wonder what he saw right before it happened. I wonder if the man just walked out into his headlights and stopped."